Picture this. You're a sailor in the year 678, rowing toward the mighty walls of Constantinople with your fellow warriors, confident that your fleet will crush these Byzantine weaklings once and for all. The morning sun glints off your weapons, and victory seems certain. Then suddenly, the sea itself catches fire. Jets of liquid flame shoot from the enemy ships like the breath of dragons, turning your wooden vessel into a floating inferno. You dive into the water to escape, only to discover that this hellish fire burns even on the waves themselves. Welcome to your first and last encounter with Greek fire, the most terrifying secret weapon of the ancient world. For over 600 years, this mysterious liquid fire gave the Byzantine Empire a military advantage so devastating that enemies would flee at the mere sight of those bronze siphons mounted on imperial ships. While other nations relied on swords, arrows, and catapults, the Byzantines had weaponized fire itself. They turned naval warfare into something resembling a nightmare, where the ocean became their ally and enemy fleets became floating funeral pyres. What made this weapon so special wasn't just its destructive power, but the fact that water couldn't put it out. Imagine trying to douse a campfire with gasoline instead of water. That's essentially what happened when sailors tried to escape Greek fire by jumping overboard. The story begins in the 7th century, when the mighty Byzantine Empire found itself surrounded by enemies who wanted nothing more than to tear down the walls of Constantinople and claim its riches. The Arabs had been hammering at the empire's borders for decades, and their naval technology was getting better every year. Emperor Constantine IV faced a simple but terrifying reality. His empire needed an edge, or it would become just another footnote in history. The pressure was enormous. Arab fleets were growing bolder, launching massive naval assaults that threatened to overwhelm the Byzantine defenders. Traditional weapons weren't cutting it anymore, literally and figuratively. Enter a mysterious figure whose name has echoed through history, Callinicos of Heliopolis. This architect and inventor didn't look like the kind of guy who would change the course of warfare forever. But sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones nobody sees coming. Callinicos had fled from Syria when the Arabs conquered his homeland, bringing with him knowledge that would prove more valuable than 1,000 chests of gold. The exact details of his background remain fuzzy. Some sources claim he was a Syrian refugee. Others suggest he was an alchemist, and a few even hint that he might have been a former Arab engineer who switched sides. What we know for certain is that he approached the Byzantine court with a proposal that sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, a liquid that would burn on water. The imperial engineers were skeptical, naturally. After all, this was an era when most people thought the earth was flat and that diseases were caused by bad air. The idea of fire burning on water seemed to violate the basic laws of nature. But Constantine IV was desperate enough to listen to crazy ideas, especially when they came from someone who claimed to have inside knowledge of Arab military tactics. The testing phase must have been quite a spectacle. Picture a group of very serious Byzantine officials standing around a harbour, watching some refugee pour mysterious liquid onto the water and then light it on fire. The moment that flame caught and spread across the surface like a living thing, everyone knew they were looking at something that would change everything. The development process wasn't just about creating the fire itself. It was about weaponizing it. You can't exactly hand sailors a bucket of flammable liquid and tell them to splash it on enemy ships. The Byzantines needed a delivery system that was both effective and safe for their own crews. This led to the creation of those famous bronze siphons, engineering marvels that could project streams of liquid fire with deadly accuracy. These weren't simple tubes. They were sophisticated pressure systems that required skilled operators who could aim, pump, and maintain the equipment while under attack. The siphons themselves became works of art as much as weapons of war. Byzantine craftsmen decorated them with bronze lions and other fearsome creatures, turning functional military equipment into psychological weapons. Enemy sailors would see these gleaming bronze monsters mounted on the prows of Byzantine ships and know they were about to face something beyond their understanding. The psychological impact was almost as important as the physical destruction. Word spread quickly through enemy fleets about ships that breathed fire like mythical beasts. But the siphons were just one delivery method. Byzantine engineers also developed ceramic grenades filled with Greek fire, basically ancient napalm bombs that could be hurled by hand or launched from catapults. These clay containers were designed to shatter on impact, spreading their burning contents across enemy decks and rigging. The fragments of pottery would embed themselves in wooden surfaces, creating multiple ignition points that were almost impossible to extinguish. Some versions even included metal fragments, turning them into combination incendiary and shrapnel weapons. The manufacturing process for Greek fire was incredibly complex and dangerous. The imperial workshops where it was produced were heavily guarded secrets, with workers sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. The ingredients had to be mixed in precise proportions, heated to exact temperatures, and stored under specific conditions. One wrong measurement or a moment of carelessness could result in explosive accidents that would level entire buildings. The workshops themselves were built like fortresses, with thick walls and limited access points to prevent both industrial espionage and accidental disasters. Quality control was a matter of life and death, literally. Inferior Greek fire might fail to ignite properly, leaving Byzantine ships defenseless against enemy attacks. Too potent a mixture could explode prematurely, destroying the very ships it was meant to protect. The master alchemists who oversaw production became some of the most valuable and closely watched individuals in the empire. They lived under constant surveillance, their movements tracked, and their communications monitored. Some historians suggest that these craftsmen were essentially prisoners of their own expertise, too dangerous to let roam freely, but too valuable to eliminate. The first major test of Greek fire came during the Arab siege of Constantinople from 674 to 678. For 4 years, massive Arab fleets had blockaded the city, slowly strangling the empire's capital. Traditional Byzantine naval tactics weren't working against the superior numbers and improved Arab ship designs. The situation was desperate. If Constantinople fell, the entire empire would crumble like a house of cards. That's when Constantine IV decided to unveil his secret weapon. The results were spectacular and terrifying. Arab chroniclers described the attack in terms that sound almost supernatural. Ships appeared to burst into flames spontaneously, their crews screaming as liquid fire poured down on them from Byzantine vessels that seemed untouchable. The fire clung to everything it touched: wood, rope, cloth, and human skin, burning with an intensity that defied every natural law the Arabs thought they understood. Most shocking of all, the flames continued to burn, even when ships sank beneath the waves, creating an apocalyptic scene of fire dancing on the ocean's surface. The Arab fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours earlier, broke apart in panic. Experienced naval commanders, who had conquered dozens of ports, found themselves helpless against an enemy that could weaponize the elements themselves. Ships that tried to ram Byzantine vessels found themselves engulfed in flames before they could close the distance. Those that attempted to flee discovered that Greek fire could be projected over surprising distances, turning retreat into a deadly gauntlet of burning projectiles. The psychological impact extended far beyond that single battle. Word of the fireship spread throughout the Arab world, creating a legend that would haunt their naval commanders for generations. Future Arab attacks on Constantinople would be planned with the assumption that they would face this terrible weapon, forcing them to develop new tactics and technologies just to counter a single Byzantine advantage. The success at Constantinople was just the beginning. Byzantine engineers realized they had stumbled onto something that could revolutionize warfare, but only if they could keep improving it. The original Greek fire formula was effective, but it had limitations. The range was relatively short, the equipment was heavy, and the mixture took time to prepare properly. What followed was decades of secretive research and development that would make modern military R&D departments look like amateur science clubs. The imperial workshops became hotbeds of innovation, where alchemists and engineers pushed the boundaries of what was possible with medieval technology. They experimented with different petroleum bases, trying everything from crude oil seeping from natural springs to distilled naphtha imported from distant lands. Each variation changed how the fire burned. Some mixtures created thick, sticky flames that clung like glue, while others produced explosive bursts that could shatter enemy formations. The most prized formulations burned with such intensity that they could melt bronze fittings and turn iron weapons into twisted sculptures. Temperature control became an obsession among the craftsmen. They discovered that heating the mixture to specific temperatures before deployment could dramatically increase its effectiveness. Too cool, and the fire would sputter and die. Too hot, and it would explode before leaving the siphon. Master fireworkers developed an almost supernatural ability to judge temperature by sight and smell, creating perfectly calibrated infernos on demand. Some even claimed they could tell the quality of a batch just by listening to how it bubbled during preparation. The delivery systems evolved rapidly as well. Early siphons were crude affairs that required multiple operators and left crews vulnerable during the lengthy reloading process. Later versions incorporated pressure chambers that could store preheated mixtures, allowing for rapid-fire deployment that caught enemies completely off guard. The most advanced systems included rotating nozzles that could sweep across enemy formations, like deadly sprinklers, covering entire ship decks in seconds. But the Byzantines didn't stop at ship-mounted weapons. They developed portable versions that infantry could carry during siege warfare, essentially creating the world's first flamethrowers. These handheld siphons were smaller but no less deadly, perfect for clearing enemy soldiers from fortification walls or burning through wooden siege equipment. The sight of Byzantine soldiers advancing with these fire-spitting devices was enough to break the morale of even veteran troops who had faced countless conventional weapons. The ceramic grenade technology also advanced dramatically. Early versions were simple clay pots that shattered unpredictably, sometimes failing to break at all. Later designs incorporated controlled fracture patterns that ensured the containers would split into optimal fragment sizes. Some grenades even included timing mechanisms made from slow-burning fuses, allowing them to be thrown over walls and explode moments after landing. The psychological effect of delayed explosions was devastating. Enemy soldiers never knew when or where the next burst of flame would appear. Storage and transportation presented unique challenges that pushed Byzantine engineering to new limits. Greek fire was incredibly volatile, capable of igniting from the smallest spark or even excessive heat from the sun. Special containers had to be designed with cooling systems and pressure release valves to prevent catastrophic accidents during long sea voyages. Ships carrying large quantities of Greek fire required specially trained crews who understood the deadly cargo they were handling. The logistics became so complex that the empire established the entire military branch dedicated to Greek fire operations. These specialists were part chemist, part engineer, and part warrior, capable of maintaining equipment under combat conditions while mixing fresh batches during extended campaigns. They developed their own code language to communicate about formulations and procedures, adding another layer of security to an already secretive operation. Quality testing involved controlled burns that could be seen for miles, creating spectacular displays that served dual purposes as weapons trials and propaganda demonstrations. Foreign ambassadors visiting Constantinople were sometimes treated to carefully orchestrated displays of Greek fire capabilities, ensuring that word of Byzantine military superiority would spread to potential enemies. These demonstrations were theatre as much as they were military exercises, designed to project power without actually having to use it. The training programs for Greek fire operators became legendary within the Byzantine military. New recruits spent months learning to handle the equipment safely before they were ever allowed near actual combat situations. Many suffered burns during training, some severe enough to end military careers before they truly began. The mortality rate among trainees was high enough that hazard pay became a standard part of compensation packages for fire weapon specialists. But the empire's enemies weren't sitting idle while the Byzantines perfected their fire weapons. Arab engineers launched their own crash programs to develop countermeasures, testing everything from specially treated wood to experimental hull coatings that might resist Greek fire. Some attempted to create their own versions of the weapon, though these efforts usually ended in spectacular failures that destroyed more Arab ships than Byzantine ones ever did. The arms race intensified when other powers began seeking their own fire weapons. Italian city-states sent spies disguised as merchants to Constantinople, hoping to steal samples or bribe workers into revealing secrets. Northern European kingdoms offered enormous sums for even basic information about Greek fire composition. The Byzantines found themselves defending not just against military attacks, but against an unprecedented campaign of industrial espionage. Counterintelligence became as important as the weapon itself. Byzantine agents planted false information about Greek fire ingredients, leading enemy alchemists down useless research paths that consumed years of effort and enormous resources. Some of these disinformation campaigns were so successful that rival powers spent decades trying to weaponize completely harmless substances, convinced they were on the verge of recreating the Byzantine advantage. The economic impact of Greek fire extended far beyond military applications. The empire's control over this technology gave them significant leverage in diplomatic negotiations, allowing them to demand favorable trade agreements and territorial concessions from nations that feared facing the fire weapons. Some historians argue that Greek fire was as important to Byzantine diplomacy as it was to Byzantine warfare, serving as the ultimate bargaining chip in international relations. By the 10th century, Greek fire had evolved into something approaching a perfect weapon system. The formulations had been refined to burn hotter and longer than ever before. The delivery systems had become portable and reliable, and the tactical applications had expanded to cover nearly every aspect of medieval warfare. When Russian Prince Igor launched his massive naval assault on Constantinople in 941, he faced a weapon that had been perfected through centuries of continuous development. A weapon that had been perfected through. The Russian fleet that approached Constantinople in 941 was massive by any standard. Over 1,000 ships carrying tens of thousands of warriors who had swept down from the northern steppes like a human tsunami. Prince Igor had spent years planning this assault, studying Byzantine weaknesses, and assembling what he believed was an unstoppable armada. His ships were packed with experienced fighters who had conquered countless settlements along the Black Sea coast. These weren't inexperienced raiders. They were professional warriors who knew how to take fortified cities and had never met a wall they couldn't breach or a fleet they couldn't sink. But Igor had made one critical miscalculation. He had planned his attack based on outdated intelligence about Byzantine capabilities. The Greek fire technology he would face had evolved far beyond anything his spies had reported. While he expected to encounter the basic siphon systems that had been used decades earlier, the Byzantines had spent those years perfecting delivery methods that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. The ceramic grenades alone had become so sophisticated that they could be programmed to explode at different intervals, creating cascading walls of flame that could engulf entire sections of an attacking fleet. The battle itself became a masterclass in how technological superiority could overcome numerical disadvantage. As the Russian ships approached the harbour, Byzantine vessels seemed to appear from nowhere, emerging from hidden coves and protected anchorages like sea monsters rising from the depths. The first volleys of Greek fire caught the Russians completely unprepared. Ships that had survived countless battles against conventional enemies found themselves transformed into floating crematoriums within minutes. What made this attack particularly devastating was how the Byzantines had learned to coordinate their fire weapons with traditional naval tactics. While Greek fire created chaos and terror among enemy formations, conventional Byzantine ships would sweep in to capture vessels whose crews had abandoned ship or finish off those too damaged to escape. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction, where every movement had been planned and practiced until it became second nature. The Russian chronicles of this battle read like horror stories rather than military reports. Warriors described water that burned like oil, ships that exploded without warning, and flames that seemed to chase fleeing sailors across the waves. Some accounts claim that the fire burned so intensely it heated the metal fittings on ships until they glowed red hot, making it impossible for crews to handle their own equipment. The psychological trauma was so severe that surviving Russian sailors refused to serve on ships for years afterward, spreading stories that made future recruitment for naval campaigns nearly impossible. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the Byzantine victory wasn't the immediate destruction of Igor's fleet. It was how completely the attack was documented and studied for future improvements. Byzantine military engineers treated each battle as a field test for their weapons, carefully recording what worked, what didn't, and what could be enhanced for next time. They noted wind conditions that affected fire projection, ship designs that proved more vulnerable to certain attack patterns, and crew reactions that could be exploited in future engagements. This systematic approach to military innovation kept Greek fire ahead of any countermeasures that enemies might develop. While other nations were still trying to understand the basic principles behind the weapon, Byzantine engineers were already working on the next generation of improvements. They developed specialized training scenarios that simulated different enemy tactics, allowing their crews to practice responses to situations they might never have encountered in actual combat. The secrecy surrounding Greek fire reached almost paranoid levels during this period. Workers in the imperial workshops were required to live on site during major production periods, essentially becoming prisoners in luxury accommodations. Their families were relocated to imperial compounds where they could be monitored and protected, or eliminated if security was compromised. Some craftsmen were assigned bodyguards who doubled as watchers, ensuring that no unauthorized conversations took place about work-related topics. The empire even developed elaborate cover stories for the workshops themselves. Official records listed them as facilities for producing religious icons or luxury goods for the imperial court. Deliveries of raw materials were disguised as shipments of artistic supplies or ceremonial objects. The workers themselves were officially employed as painters, sculptors, or metalworkers, maintaining the fiction even in internal documents that might be stolen or copied by enemy agents. Communication between different workshops used coded language that changed regularly and required special training to understand. A message about preparing golden paint for the emperor's portrait might actually be instructions for increasing Greek fire production to supply an upcoming military campaign. These codes became so sophisticated that even high-ranking military officials sometimes had trouble understanding the communications they were supposed to be reviewing. The international response to Greek fire's continued evolution became increasingly desperate as the centuries passed. Arab alchemists offered enormous rewards for any information about Byzantine fire weapons, leading to several spectacular espionage attempts that ended badly for everyone involved. One famous case involved a supposed Byzantine defector who claimed to know the complete Greek fire formula. After months of negotiations and enormous payments, the Arabs discovered they had been sold a recipe for a particularly expensive type of lamp oil. Italian maritime republics took a different approach, attempting to develop their own incendiary weapons through independent research. Some of these experiments produced interesting results, including several accidental discoveries that advanced chemistry and metallurgy in unexpected directions. Unfortunately for the Italians, none of their innovations came close to matching the effectiveness of genuine Greek fire. Most attempts resulted in weapons that were more dangerous to their own crews than to enemy targets. The arms race created a black market in supposed Greek fire ingredients that operated across the Mediterranean for centuries. Merchants sold everything from specially treated petroleum to exotic chemical compounds, claiming they were essential components of the Byzantine formula. Most of these substances were completely useless, but the trade continued because the potential payoff for discovering the real secret was so enormous that even minimal chances seemed worth pursuing. Meanwhile, the Byzantines were dealing with their own internal security challenges. As the number of people involved in Greek fire production increased, so did the risk of security breaches. The empire developed an elaborate system of compartmentalized knowledge where no single individual outside the highest levels of government understood the complete process. Workers might specialize in mixing certain ingredients, operating specific equipment, or handling particular storage procedures, but none had access to the full picture. This compartmentalization created its own problems when key personnel died or were killed in accidents. Several times, crucial knowledge was temporarily lost when specialized craftsmen died without properly training replacements. The empire learned to maintain multiple parallel teams working on identical processes, ensuring that no single accident or security breach could completely compromise their capabilities. The testing and quality control procedures became increasingly elaborate as Greek fire technology advanced. New formulations had to be evaluated under dozens of different conditions, varying temperatures, humidity levels, storage periods, and combat scenarios. The empire maintained secret testing facilities on remote islands where experiments could be conducted without attracting attention from foreign observers or risking damage to valuable infrastructure. These testing programs generated enormous amounts of data about fire weapon effectiveness under different conditions. Byzantine engineers compiled detailed charts showing optimal deployment strategies for various weather patterns, enemy ship types, and tactical situations. This information became as closely guarded as the weapon formulas themselves, since it could provide crucial insights into Greek fire capabilities and limitations. Greek fire vanished from history as mysteriously as it appeared, taking its secrets to the grave when the last master alchemists died without passing on their knowledge. The Byzantine Empire's greatest weapon became its most haunting mystery, a reminder that sometimes the most devastating innovations can disappear forever, leaving us to wonder what other ancient technologies might have changed the world if their secrets hadn't been lost to time.